Bruce Lee was probed. What's your fighting style? By Frazier. His wisdom left Joe silent for a. Bruce Lee was probed. What's your fighting style? By Frazier. His wisdom left Joe silent for a moment. And then changed everything. The air in the gym was thick with the scent of leather, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of blood from split knuckles. Joe Frazier, the heavyweight champion of the world, leaned against the ropes, arms crossed, watching Bruce Lee move like liquid lightning across the canvas. The smaller man, barely 135 pounds soaking wet, danced on the balls of his feet, hands flickering like serpents, his body coiled with a tension that seemed to defy physics. Frazier had seen fighters before. Men who hit like freight trains, men who bled but never broke, men who could take a punch and laugh while doing it. But Bruce? Bruce didn't just fight. He existed in the space between strikes, as if the very concept of combat had been distilled into something purer, something almost philosophical. Joe exhaled through his nose, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. All right, little dragon. You move like a damn ghost. But let me ask you something, what's your style? You got a name for this dance you do? Bruce didn't stop moving. His hands remained loose, his stance fluid, but his dark eyes locked onto Frazier with an intensity that made the bigger man straighten instinctively. Then, without warning, Bruce exploded. Not with a punch. Not with a kick. With words. Style? Bruce's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a blade unsheathed. You ask me about style? Joe, my friend, style is a cage. It is the walls men build around themselves because they are afraid to be free. Frazier blinked. The gym around them seemed to still. Even the distant thud of gloves on heavy bags faded into silence. Bruce took a step forward, his movements no longer playful, but deliberate. You want to know my style? I do not have one. I am the style. I am the water that flows around the rock. I am the wind that bends the tree. I am the fist that does not clench until the moment it must strike. He tapped his temple. The mind is the weapon. The body is only the tool. And tools can be broken. Joe's jaw tightened. He had heard bullshit before, fighters who talked in riddles, who claimed their way was the only way. But Bruce wasn't selling anything. He wasn't trying to impress. He was teaching, and the lesson was cutting deeper than any right hook ever had. You're saying I'm trapped in my own style? Frazier's voice was low, dangerous. Not angry. Challenged. Bruce smiled. Not with malice, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had already won the fight before the first punch was thrown. Joe, you are the king of the brawl. You take a hit like a man, you give one back like a god. But tell me, when was the last time you thought in the ring? Not reacted. Not endured. Thought. Frazier opened his mouth. Closed it. Bruce pressed on. You rely on your strength, your endurance, your will. And those are beautiful things. But what happens when you meet a man who is faster? What happens when your body betrays you? When the years stack up, and the legs slow, and the hands don't snap back like they used to? He spread his arms. Will you still be the champion then? Or will you be just another man who was great, until he wasn't? The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Frazier's hands flexed at his sides. His pride roared at him to swing, to prove this little man wrong with his fists. But something else, something deeper, something older, held him back. Because Bruce wasn't wrong. Joe had been slowing. The last few fights had been wars of attrition, his victories coming not from brilliance, but from sheer, stubborn refusal to lose. And one day, that wouldn't be enough. Bruce saw the realization dawn in Frazier's eyes. He stepped back, his stance relaxing, the tension leaving his body like a sigh. I do not say this to insult you, Joe. I say it because I respect you. A man who fights with his heart is a man worth learning from. But a man who fights with his mind? That is a man who can never be defeated. Frazier exhaled, long and slow. Then, to Bruce's surprise, he laughed with a deep, rumbling sound that filled the gym. Damn, little dragon. You just took the wind out of my sails without throwing a punch. Bruce bowed his head slightly. The greatest battles are not won with fists, Joe. They are won before the first blow is struck. For a long moment, the two men stood there, the champion and the philosopher, the brawler and the artist. Then Frazier reached out, offering his hand. Bruce took it. No words were needed. 3 years later, Manila, Philippines. The heat was suffocating. The air in the Araneta Coliseum was thick with the roar of the crowd, the stench of sweat and adrenaline, the electric hum of history being made. Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali stood across from each other, gloves raised, eyes locked in a stare that had lasted 3 years, 3 fights, and countless sleepless nights. This was the thriller in Manila. The final chapter. Ali danced, taunting, his jab flicking out like a viper's tongue. Frazier stalked forward, his body coiled, his breath coming in controlled bursts. But something was different. Joe wasn't just charging. He wasn't just swinging. He was thinking. Ali threw a left hook. Frazier slipped it, not by instinct, but by calculation. His counter right hand rocketed up, catching Ali on the jaw, snapping his head back. The crowd erupted. Ali staggered, his eyes wide with shock. That wasn't the Joe Frazier they knew. Round after round, Frazier moved with a precision that wasn't his. He feinted, he pivoted, he adapted. When Ali tried to clinch, Joe broke free with a sharp elbow, a move he had never used before. When Ali backed up, Joe didn't rush in blindly, he cut off the ring, forcing the fight where he wanted it. And then, in the 14th round, it happened. Ali, exhausted, his legs trembling, threw a wild right hand. Frazier saw it coming, not because he was faster, but because he understood. He ducked under the punch, stepped inside, and drove a left hook into Ali's ribs with the force of a sledgehammer. Ali gasped, his breath leaving him in a ragged wheeze. Another hook, this one to the body. Another. Another. Ali's corner threw in the towel. The fight was over. Frazier stood in the center of the ring, his chest heaving, his body battered but unbroken. The crowd chanted his name. Ali lay on the canvas, spent, his greatness momentarily eclipsed. And then, from the corner, a voice cut through the noise. Joe. Frazier turned. Bruce Lee stood at ringside, his face unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Frazier nodded once. A silent acknowledgement. Bruce returned the gesture. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the arena. The champion watched him go. Then, for the first time in his life, Joe Frazier knelt in the center of the ring, not in defeat, but in gratitude. Because he understood now. The greatest fight of his life hadn't been against Ali. It had been against himself. O ultimo round. O ginásio estava vazio agora. Os holofotes se apagaram dixando apenas o brilho pálido das luzes de emergência a iluminar o ring. Frazier permaneceu de joelhos, as mãos apoiadas no chão, sentindo o peso de cada cicatriz, de cada golpe que havia suportado. Não eram apenas as marcas de Ali, eram as suas próprias dúvidas, o medo de nunca ser suficiente, o fantasma de homem que ele havia passado anos tentando provar que existia. He stood up slowly, his muscles protesting. The white towel, stained with sweat and blood, was still there, thrown in the corner. He picked it up, ran it over his face, down his neck, as if he could wipe away not just the sweat, but the past. As he carefully folded it, something fell to the floor with a metallic sound. A key. Frazier frowned. It wasn't yours. It didn't belong to any of his coaches. He approached, picked it up. Small, old, with a number engraved on it, 1967. The year he had first lost to Ollie. The year it had all started. Outside, the parking lot was almost deserted. Only one car remained, a black Mustang, with scratched paint and blacked-out headlights. The driver's door opened before he got close. Bruce Lee came out, hands in his pockets, the same calm look as before. "You dropped it," Frazier said, holding out the key. Bruce didn't catch it. Instead, he tilted his head toward the passenger seat. "Come in." Frazier hesitated. "Not because of distrust, but because, for the first time in years, I didn't know what would come next." Still, he got in. The car smelled of old leather and incense. On the panel, a yellowed photo, a young Bruce, in a kimono, standing next to an older man, with a stern face and piercing eyes. Frazier recognized him immediately, Ip Man, the Wing Chun master. "My father used to say that a fighter only understands victory after losing everything," said Bruce, starting the engine. "Did you lose today?" Frazier looked at his hands, still swollen. "I don't know." Bruce smiled, but it wasn't a victory smile. It was the smile of someone who already knew the answer. "So it's not finished yet." The car took off, leaving the gym, the crowd, the ring behind. They drove in silence for hours, crossing bridges, passing through decaying neighborhoods, until they reached an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The windows were broken, the gate was rusty, but the new lock gleamed in the moonlight. Bruce stopped the car and tossed the key to Frazier. "Open it." Inside, the place was not what it seemed. The concrete floor was clean, the walls reinforced with steel beams. In the center, a ring, smaller than conventional, with thinner ropes and a polished wooden floor. All around, punching bags, training dummies, mirrors that reflected not just images, but shadows. And in the corner, sitting in a meditation position, a man. There. Not the Ollie of now, aged, sick, with shaking hands. But the Ollie of 1967. The champion. The invincible. Frazier froze. "What is that?" Bruce closed the door behind them. "A place where fights don't end when the judge raises his hand." Ollie opened his eyes. There was no hate in them. No challenge. Just a silent question. Frazier understood. This wasn't a rematch. It wasn't a test. It was a mirror. He took off his coat, the gloves he still wore, and entered the ring. There he stood up. They didn't exchange words. There was no need. The first punch came from Frazier, not with anger, but with precision, as if each movement was an answer to a question he had asked himself for decades. Ollie blocked, counterattacked, but not with the speed he used to. It was as if they were fighting in slow motion, each blow loaded with meaning. Bruce watched from the corner, motionless. In the third round, Frazier felt something break inside him, not a bone, but a barrier. He saw, for a moment, the young man he had been, the boy from South Carolina who was beaten by white people and learned to fight back. The boxer who had been called stupid for not reading books, ugly for not being elegant, weak for not giving up. And then, he laughed. There he stopped, confused. Frazier dropped his hands. "He arrives." Ollie hesitated, but also backed away. "Did you give up?" "No," Frazier took a deep breath. "I won." Bruce nodded, as if he had expected this. "And now?" Frazier looked at the ring, at Ollie, at the shadows still dancing on the walls. "Now I'm going home." Ollie smiled, for the first time in years. "Me too." They left together, leaving the shed behind. Bruce locked the door, put the key in his pocket. "And you?" asked Frazier. Bruce looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise. "I'm already home." Frazier didn't ask anything else. He got into Bruce's car, and they headed back to town. They never saw each other again. But, years later, when Frazier had already hung up his gloves and Ollie was fighting Parkinson's, a journalist asked the champion, "What was your biggest victory?" Ollie thought for a long time. Then he smiled. Joe Frazier. And Frazier, when he heard that, just nodded. Because, in the end, the biggest fight was never against each other. It was against the man in the mirror. And this one, he had finally won. The last round. The Louisville sun burned down on the asphalt as Bruce parked the car in front of the small wooden gymnasium where it had all started. Frazier went down first, his steps heavy, his body still scarred from battle. Ollie came out next, slower now, his hands shaking slightly, but his eyes still alive, like embers beneath the ash. "Are you going to be okay?" asked Frazier, looking at the dilapidated gym, the peeling walls, the ring covered in a torn canvas. Ollie didn't respond. He just walked to the door, pushed it with his shoulder and entered. The smell of old sweat and cracked leather hit him like a punch. There he was, the ring where he had danced with his fists for the first time, where he had learned that glory was not made of gold, but of scars. Frazier stood in the doorway, watching. He saw Ollie climb the steps with difficulty, leaning on the ropes. He saw him stand in the center of the ring, his legs wobbly, his body bowed by time. And then, as if challenging an invisible enemy, Ollie raised his fists. "Float like a butterfly," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Frazier smiled. "I knew what was coming next." "Sting like a bee," he added, entering the gym. Ollie turned around, surprised. The two stared at each other for a long moment, two old lions, gray manes, worn teeth. Then Ollie laughed, a broken but genuine sound. "You still remember?" "How can I forget?" Frazier climbed into the ring, knees creaking. "You taught me that. And I taught you how to take a punch." Ollie shook his head, eyes moist. "No. You taught me how to get up later." Frazier extended his hand. There he held her, and for a moment, they were young again, two boys with dreams too big for that place. But the moment passed. Ollie released his hand, took a deep breath and looked at the ropes. "I think it's time to go down." Frazier nodded. "Yeah." They left together, leaving the ring behind. Outside, the sun was already high, relentless. Bruce was waiting for them, leaning against the car, arms crossed. "And now?" he asked. Ollie looked at Frazier. Frazier looked at Ollie. "Now," said Ollie, "we're going home." Bruce started the car. Frazier got into the back seat, Ollie at his side. The engine roared, and they drove off, leaving the gym behind, as they had left the warehouse years before. They never came back. Years passed. Frazier went first, silently, as he lived. Ollie followed him shortly after, but not before receiving one last visit. A journalist, too young to understand what those two men had been, asked. "What did you leave behind, champion?" There, already weak, almost voiceless, he smiled. "A friend." And he closed his eyes. In the end, the lights went out. But in the dark, where no one else could see, two ghosts danced in the ring, light as butterflies, lethal as bees. And, for the first time, neither fell. The last heist. The journalist left the room with the recorder in hand, Ollie's words echoing in his mind like a slow, precise punch. Outside, the world continued its frenetic pace, screens flashing, voices shouting, stories being rewritten every second. But there, in that hospital room, time had stopped. The man who had once been the loudest voice on the planet was now whispering, and the world, distracted, barely noticed. Bruce, sitting in the waiting room, leafed through an old magazine. The pages were yellowed, full of photos of fights that no longer mattered. He looked up as the journalist passed, but said nothing. It didn't need to. They both knew that this was the end of something that had started long before the spotlight, long before the titles, long before the world decided that these two men were rivals. 20 years before. The gym smelled of stale sweat and liniment. Ollie, with slower movements, but still dangerous, wrapped the bands around his hands while Frazier, on the other side of the ring, watched in silence. There was no judge, no audience, no cameras. Just them, the ring and the ghost of everything they had been. "Do you still have that left hook?" Ollie teased, testing the distance with a lazy jab. Frazier did not respond. He just advanced, slowly, like an old bull, and threw a punch that echoed in the empty gym. Ollie swerved, but not fast enough. The impact made him take a step back. "It still hurts," Ollie admitted, rubbing his chin. Frazier smiled. A rare smile, almost invisible beneath his gray beard. "It will always hurt." They fought for a few more minutes, without rushing, without anger. Just two men keeping time, like old dancers rehearsing the steps of a forgotten choreography. When they stopped, Ollie was panting, leaning against the ropes. "We should have done this before," he said. Frazier wiped his face with a towel. "No. We needed all that. From the hate, the crowd, the screams. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been worth it." Ollie nodded. "I knew it was true." The last round. At the hospital, Bruce received the news over the phone. The doctor's voice was professional, but he heard what was not said. "There is nothing more to do." He hung up and stood for a long moment, looking out the window. Outside, the city remained indifferent. When he entered the room, Ollie was no longer there. The bed was empty, the sheets folded neatly. Bruce felt something break inside him, but it wasn't pain. It was relief. A strange relief, as if a fight that had lasted decades was finally over. In the corner of the room, on the bedside table, there was a pair of boxing gloves. Old, worn, with the seams almost falling apart. Bruce picked them up and held them to his chest, as if he could feel the weight of the punches they had already thrown, the blows they had deflected, the victories and defeats they had witnessed. And then, as if he knew it was time, he placed them on the bed and left. The empty ring. Years later, a boy entered the abandoned gym. The walls were peeling, the floor covered in dust, but the ring was still there, the ropes slack, the floor creaking beneath their feet. He climbed up, imagining what it would be like to be there, under the lights, with thousands of people shouting his name. But there was no one. He punched the air, then another. He felt the wind pass through his fingers and, for a moment, he thought he heard laughter. Two voices, one deep, the other hoarse, as if two men were there, invisible, exchanging blows without ever really hitting each other. The boy smiled and jumped out of the ring. When he left, he didn't look back. And so, without an audience, without applause, without a story to tell, the last round ended. In the dark, two ghosts danced. And, for the first time, neither fell.